on. Okay. For some reason, share on YouTube link is gone. Let me quickly check what happened.
Hey, Paul.
Hello. Good to see you again. Wow, you got snow.
Yeah. From now until June, probably.
Holy cats. Yeah, we don't do that here.
I know.
Hey, Deepak. Hey, Paul. We're recording, so but we can prune this part of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
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 Nalini, unfortunately, I don't know what happened. It's not letting me stream on YouTube.
It's not letting you stream on YouTube.
That option itself has disappeared. Are you, any of you guys seeing? Like, you guys should have the same access. Does anybody else sees the option share on YouTube?
Okay, let me look.
Oh, it disappeared. It was there the
Hold on,
last time when I did the testing, but when I went
I
live.
have live. Dhruv, I have a live on YouTube, so I click it.
Yes, and let me share you the username password immediately. I'm sending it to you by email.
Okay, I'm clicking.
And then use this username password to join the YouTube. 1 second.
Should I use the IIESoc one, right?
Yeah, so I'll have to give you the username password, right? Just give me a second.
Okay. I'm going to pause recording.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Hope you guys can see the screen.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Guys, let me welcome you all to Connections 2020. This is the post ITF 109 forum that we will be conducting whole of this week. Quick introduction. This is IIESoc and INTC together are presenting this iteration of Connections. We will be a 5-day event. Each day we will have around 2.5 hours of content. There will be speakers, panelists, a lot of good discussions, and hope you guys enjoy this event. So let me give a very quick introduction of IIESoc and INTC. I'm expecting there are a lot of new people who are attending Connections for the first time, so they would like to know who we are. We are a non-profit that brings together different stakeholders from the networking world, from vendors, academia, service providers, government, all these entities, with the common mission of increasing the awareness about ITF, increasing Indian participation in ITF. And for that, we organize events like this, where Connections is our annual event, and we do multiple regular monthly events, which we call RFCs Be Love, since 2017. So this is our 4th iteration of Connections that we are doing. And what you see on the right is some of our board members who are recently a new set of board members that we have for IIESoc. The second entity is INTC, Industry Network Technology Council. INTC is also a nonprofit based in US with a mission to focus on enterprises, academia, and government organization, again, to promote internet standards in a vendor-neutral environment. And INTC has been hosting some amazing webinars, and some of the speakers that you will see in our programs have also spoken at the INTC webinar, which were very well attended and very well liked. And INTC has been doing this for about an year. So this iteration, we joined together in hands, INTC and IIESoc. Nalini and I are some of the common members of both the body, and we decided that this iteration, anyway, we are in an online world. Let's do it in an India-US together conference rather than just an Indian conference, what connections used to be. Some pictures of reminiscence from past, where we used to meet face to face. Of course, this whole year has been online conferences. Connection could not escape that. And this is anyway the second best way to continue the tradition of connections in an online fashion. In the past, we used to do a 2 days of physical event, always in India, just before the Asian ITF meeting, because people were traveling all the way to Singapore and Bangkok, and we thought let's add one more hop to India, have an event, and then move on to the ITF in Asia. We have done this in Kolkata once and twice in Bangalore. Some of the tracks were IoT, SDN, IPv6, routing, security, research, deployment. Some you will see are continuing even in this track, and some are new. You can find about the past events on the link that you see on your page. This iteration is going to be a little bit different. We have a 5-day online event. Instead of a pre-ITF, we are doing it post-ITF. As I said, we are doing this in an India-US combined by 2 entities, IIESoc and INTC, in collaboration. We are trying some new format. We are bringing in some new speakers. And the common question that is asked is, are these being recorded? Yes, these are being recorded. Live stream, I think we are facing some technical issues. So once I get off in my part of the presentation, I'll get into debugging that, and hopefully we will be live on YouTube pretty soon as well. So this is, you already are here, so you are well aware of what's our opening keynote panel. We have some great internet pioneers on this panel. So I'm looking forward to a great conversation in the next couple of hours. Let me introduce the rest of the days. We have IPv6 track, which is around 9 hours after the end of this track. So for Indians, we'll go to bed and wake up and we'll start the IPv6 track. And for our folks in US, it will be in the evening and late night for some of you. So see you there for IPv6 track. Again, great set of topics as well as a great panel. Looking forward to this. Then we have a track, which is a generic track about what is latest topics in networking that are being discussed. We have network programming, a BOF, MADINAS, which is about MAC address device identification that was recently discussed as a BOF in ITF 109. We have intent-based networking, IBN, by Jeff Tansura. So again, 3 great talks for latest in networking. Then we have transport track. This is the first time we are focusing on the transport area. We wanted to do it in a couple of past iterations, but we could not. So we are very excited to finally focus on transport area as well in our connections. So we will be discussing quick and congestion control. So again, great set of talks in transport. We will end with a closing keynote panel, which is about India and future of internet. Some great panelists here as well. We are very happy to get some new folks as part of this panel, and Deepak has been helping us with that. So this is very, we are looking forward to this as well. And then we are trying something new, which is a tutorial, on 5G for an IP engineer. So focusing on a life of like in a packet in a 5G network. So from an IP engineer's point of view, what do we need to understand about 5G? So it's a pretty good tutorial that we have planned specifically for our audience. And we will end the talk with Sridhar and I talking about the ITF work related to 5G, which is ITF network slicing and its realization. So that will end our connections this thing. So we are looking forward to this quite a bit. So thanks to all our speakers and panelists. Thank you from our bottom of our heart. A message to our audience, please ask questions. For asking questions, use the Zoom Q&A. Please write it down, your question clearly. Questions are visible to all, so audience can upvote a question. So if we have a lot of questions, maybe this will be a good way to filter them out. So please upvote. If for some reason though you wish to speak, you can always send me a message And also mark in your comment that you wish to be unmuted, but our preference would be to use the text. That will always works better in a big conference like this. Uh, when we have questions for the panel can mark that they would like to answer a particular question. Request to the panelists to use this feature. And if the audience have a question to a particular panelist, you can mention that while you are asking the question as well. Request to all panelists, please mute yourself if you're not speaking. And then for any messaging, I see people already sending lots of messages. So everybody is well aware of Zoom now, so you don't really need this, but use Zoom chat for everything else. Q&A for questions to the panelist. Thank you. Okay, so we also have a social Zoom link pre and post event. This is like for people to interact with each other. Of course, we are missing the social element when we do any of these online conferences. So what we have done is we have put a link for a Zoom meeting at our website. Once you click on this link, that will be a normal Zoom meeting where anybody can join, anybody can speak. So this will be a good way for attendees and even some panelists, if they are free, please join the social link so that people can continue to socialize with you, which is also a part of any conference apart from the main agenda and panels, etc. So let's get social as well. Continue that tradition. And for any conference, we can't do this without the help of our sponsors, Internet Society and Juniper Networks. We thank you from bottom of our hearts. The Internet Society has, in fact, been supporting us from the very start. This is the 4th iteration, and Juniper, it is the 3rd iteration. So we are very thankful for the continued support from our sponsors. So something that gives us confidence that what we are doing, they are sponsors and our attendees see value in it. So thank you. A quick idea, just to let people know what else we do. I mentioned about RFCs we love. This is our monthly meetup. Earlier we were physical, nowadays we are all online. We take up different technical discussions around standards. And as you know, as some of you may have heard of Papers We Love, the idea of RFCs We Love is inspired from that community. You can find out about our events at this link, iisoc.in/RFCs We Love. When we used to do physical ITF meetings, at that time, we used to also organize ITF India community get together, sometimes lunch, sometimes dinner, just so that people who might be new coming from India, they meet the right set of people. They have the network already built in from the day that they join the ITF community. So with that idea, we have been doing this for a couple of years, and we hope to start this again once we start meeting physically. INTC, as I mentioned, has been doing some great set of webinars. They started off with introduction to ITF, to the enterprises, various IPv6 sessions, fundamental, history, transition, address planning, security, and some other interesting set of technologies as well. Introduction to quantum. I gave a talk on PCE. Henning did a great session on stir and shake. We had IoT, MUD, messaging, MLS, all these amazing track, including DO, which was one of my special webinars that I really enjoyed. All of these materials are available in the past webinars. So if ever you want to look through it, you will find great set of material at the INTC website as well. Okay, so since I have 1 minute, I'll try to be quick. This is the way to stay in touch. I will post this in the chat window as well so that you guys have all the links and use these links to stay in touch. IIESoc is on an IETF mailing list. We have a pretty active WhatsApp group and of course some social media. INTC, you can become a member. By becoming a member, you will be able to attend all these webinars and workshops and get notification on what's the next event that we are organizing. And as well as any help, any information that you need, reach it at this email. So hope you enjoy Connections 2020. And let's start with the next 15 minutes. Nalini will talk about one of our projects, which is the IPv6 deployment at enterprise project. Nalini is the president of INTC. She's the CEO and founder of Insight product. She's recognized for her work in performance measurement and analysis. She has started multiple startups and what she's famous for is troubleshooting large enterprise network, and she has been helping them with the IPv6 migration, and that's where one of the projects that we are just gonna talk about. She's also the advisory board of IIESoc. In fact, she is involved from the start and helped to keep this community grow. So we are really looking forward to the next introduction from Nalini about one of our key projects about IPv6. Off to you, Nalini.
Thank you so much, Dhruv. And I'll have to trouble you to go to the next foil whenever I need it. Thank you so much. Okay, so to level set a bit for folks who are not so familiar with IPv6, this is from Wikipedia. It's kind of interesting. It shows you when, like, RFC 791 came out, which is the first IPv4 standard. You know, I tell you, there's probably some of you people who are on the, at least some of the panelists and some of the people on the participants, they may actually remember that. It was a bit before my time, but essentially we're running out of addresses, and we have known this for a very, very long time. And you can see that RFC 1338 first described the problem that IPv4 was not going to cut it, basically. RFC 1883 was described way back in December of '96, but then in between that, we had NAT, which has kept IPv4 alive for all these years. So anyway, but let's fast forward to 2010. You know, 2010, when IANA used the last free block of IPv6, and, you know, there's a lot of people I know who are kind of like, all right, okay, now people are really going to get going. They're going to start moving. And no, that did not happen. What happened instead was a market in IPv4 addresses. This is only a slight hyperbole and joke. You know, people are moving. People are moving quite a bit, actually. And Fred is going to give you talk about this in the IPv6 panel a bit as well. So, Dhruv, next slide, please. So what's the problem? A lot of the ISPs have adopted IPv6. Most of them, you know, support it. I have Comcast to my house, and I've had IPv6 for years and years and years. And in fact, that's what's preferred. Most of the home users, most of the mobile users have IPv6. You can see Reliance Jio single-handedly took India to the lead in IPv6 penetration. But there's a big a lag, if you will. And the lag is what we call for enterprises. And so when we talk about enterprises, what we're, yeah, go ahead, Ruth, next foil, please. Yeah. When we're talking about enterprises, what we're talking about is the large brick and mortar, traditional industry, the ones where you actually walk into a store, or like our government agencies, you know, the Social Security has done quite a bit, but, you know, IRS, all these people, you know, it's people, or the financial institutions, people where you really actually physically walk in. And you can see, so I said, well, let's just take a look, because part of the problem here is that how much the penetration is and exactly where the penetration is, it's still a bit of I'm going to say an open question, and you'll see why I say that when I show you some of the statistics. But let's just take a look. So I just looked at the Fortune 10, okay? So you can see, you know, as you might imagine in the U.S., Walmart, Amazon, Exxon, and so on. Okay, so next foil, please. So then what I did was I just started doing pings to them and going to their website. And also I also physically went to their websites. I did a web query because, you know, sometimes ping might not actually get there. But I wanted to see what things resolved to. And you can see here that Walmart is resolving to an IPv4 address. In fact, Apple is the only one that resolved to an IPv6 address. And now, so now what is this telling us? Let's think about this, but 1 minute, and I'll show you. I did geolocation to see exactly where this is going to. But you'll notice too that Amazon is resolving to an IPv4 address. Now, I happen to know from doing packet traces in for something else, when in the background, I happen to have been doing some shopping on Amazon, that actually, if you're shopping on Amazon, it actually resolves to a V6 address because, because I have V6 to my house. But let's go further. Next foil, please. So you can see here, I geolocated some of these sites, and you can see here that some of these things, in fact, all of them, all the ones that I could get are resolving to some kind of CDN. Of course, right? I mean, I'm not going to go, unless you're running your own CDN, I'm not going directly to your site. But interesting, is that they're going to a V4 over Akamai when clearly Akamai can support V6. So they're going V4. So what is this telling us? I guess what this is telling us is we've got a bunch of IPv4, and we don't know whether it's just the website, which is V4, and internally they're V6, or just the website, which is V6, and internally they're V4. We don't know. What we do know, this is what we know. We know that we're getting to their website over V4 or V6. So that's something. Okay, next foil, please. Okay. So then I said, well, let's look at some of the largest companies in India. Let's see if that's any different. And you can see here, I did the Economic Times 500 to the top 10, and I started resolving some of them there. And you can see, well, first, of course, Reliance Jio, for heaven's sakes. I mean, like who among us thinks Reliance Jio is not doing IPv6? But look at what their website resolves to, V4. But look at like State Bank of India and Tata Motors. I mean, look at that. Those are resolving to V6. But Indian Oil, Bharat Petroleum, I mean, that's as I would have expected. Again, next foil, please. I had a little bit more trouble geolocating those. But I could see that, of course, the Reliance one, they're going right straight. I mean, they're running it. They're not doing a CDN. They're doing their own. But, because you can see it goes right into Mumbai. And then the other one, I believe, I think it was one of the petroleum ones was going over AWS. But okay. All right, let's step back here. Let's next flow, please. So what are we doing here? So to me, what we've got here, we've got more IPv6 than we think, at least than I thought. But there's a lot more IPv4 than we want. And there's also a new mandate from the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, an OMB memo, saying that the direction for the federal government is IPv6 only. And the reason this is important is from an enterprise point of view, our project is IPv6 deployment at enterprises. Our enterprises are talking to the federal government. If you're in healthcare, if you're doing health insurance, you're going to be talking to Medicare, maybe Social Security. If you're in the financial industry, you're going to be talking to the Federal Reserve. You may be talking, to one of the people who do fraud monitoring. Actually, I believe it's Secret Service that does fraud monitoring, money laundering, that kind of stuff, FBI. And if they're coming in IPv6, well, we better at least have something that talks to them. But interesting, actually, I'd seriously like to talk to the folks at FBI and Tata Motors. Next flow, please, and see where they're going. So our vision is this. What we want to do is we want to do a step-by-step approach, and this is what our grants are for. And this is kind of what we're thinking. Is I think there's not going to be something else. Okay, I don't think we're going to have, you know, the IPv, who knows what, 15 or anything. Let's everybody level set. Let's just get to IPv6. Because otherwise we're going to end up with something like inches and kilometers, you know, or whatever they call it, you know, like the metric system versus whatever we do in the United States. We'll have two different systems, which I don't think is really, really great for enterprises or the internet as a whole. So we're doing a three-part thing. First, we do training. We did a bunch of that in the Aron region last year. We're doing that in APNIC this year. Then we're going to take on addressing some major hurdles. And as I say, we'll talk, that's the thing we're going to start with Aron now. And then the next step, which we've started nowhere, is deployment planning assistance. We're kind of heading over to that, and we'll start doing that starting next year. Beth, if you want to talk to us about that already, we can do that. And we're building a collaboration and deployment team all along the way. One of the things we really need to work on is good metrics. Yeah, next slide, please. So this is we have a grant. Thank you, APNIC. We have a grant. It's a joint IIESoc INTC project. These are the webinars that we're going to do. And go ahead and sign up, and we will send you links when we do those. Completely free for everybody, thanks to APNIC. Yes, next slide, please. And then for the Aron region, what we're going to start is we're going to start really looking at applications and security and see what has to be done for IPv6. We're going to be putting out a call for participation for enterprises who want to work with us, as well as if there's project participants, maybe professors, maybe PhD, postdocs, PhD candidates, or practitioners who would like to work with us. We'll put a call out, and then we'll have you give us a little thing about who you are and what you've done and so forth. But yeah, so I'm excited about that. Please sign up at the contact link there. Next slide. I think I have 1 minute. Yeah, I have time for, I think, one question. Let me go over to the.
Yes, there is a question there from Andre already.
Okay, so here's a question. Do I understand correctly that Apple's end equipment, phones, tablets, computers support IPv6, but they're using IPv4 in-house and customer facing? So funny, Andre. Yeah, this is exactly the kind of question that we need to have answers. And you know what? I actually think I was just thinking, one of those, thinking in the shower kind of things is like, how the heck do we get actual measurements? And I wonder if we can crowdsource some measurements. Because what I'm thinking right now is like, this is the time when we reach out to like folks at Apple we know and say, hey people, what are you guys doing? And then get that. But anyway, the whole measurement techniques, how do we do it? Because I know even NIST, what NIST is doing, they're measuring access to web servers, they're doing access to email servers and DNS, but that's all internet facing. I mean, who knows what's going on internally? I mean, super good question. Okay, but I think that's it for me now. Let's move on and start our panel, which I know you'll be very, very excited about. Excuse me. First, a special video message from John. Thank you so much to Aron and APNIC for their support. And we have John Curran, who's going to talk to us. He's the CEO of Aron, and he'll talk to us about why they're supporting us. And Paul Wilson, who's Director General of APNIC, he'll be on we'll have a recorded message from him tomorrow, or rather tonight, our time. Okay.
Good day, I'm John Curran, President and CEO of the American Registry for Internet Numbers, or ARIN. I'm very excited to be speaking with you now as the folks organizing Connections 2020, the India Internet Engineering Society, and the Industry Network Technology Council asked if I could say a few words about the importance of businesses connecting to the internet with IP version 6, or what we call IPv6. I'm honored to do this as it's a very important topic for any business that's trying to reach customers over the internet. Businesses everywhere are making use of the internet, and they're using it successfully to communicate with their customers, but not realizing that we're rewiring the internet behind the scenes and slowly upgrading it from IP version 4, the original internet protocol, to IP version 6. As this change happens, it's transparent to everyone on the internet, so people may not be aware it's actually a wild success. Statistics measured by major websites, for example, Google and their own statistics, say that more than 30% of the internet has already been upgraded and accesses Google via IP version 6 rather than IPv4. Even more so in the United States, more than 40%. These statistics have been echoed at other major content sites, such as Facebook and Akamai, showing that the internet is increasingly made up of IPv6 destinations. This is being driven by mobile devices. If you think about it, people with mobile phones and tablets and Internet of Things devices all connecting via the mobile cellular communications technology, that is now being driven by IP version 6 because there's so many devices. As more and more devices connect with IP version 6, businesses have to realize that that's the customers they're trying to reach, the growing modern edge of the internet. And those customers don't speak IP version 4. A website that's only IPv4 or a service that's reachable via only IPv4 is a service that many customers find slower. They get translated trying to access that website. So while businesses don't have to pay attention to IP version 6, they might want to. Even if you don't do anything, even if you don't pay attention, your competitors will. And that means customers will find your website slower and wonder why you're on a backwater of the internet. This is an important topic for businesses to pay attention to. The fact that the internet is upgrading is something we don't talk much about, but it's a major issue. It's been going on for decades. I think that people will find the developments going on to be very exciting. And I hope that you find the Connections 2020 track about IPv6 informative to this end. Thank you. I hope you enjoy the day. Bye-bye.
Okay, so let's start with our keynote panel. That was great to hear from John. So this is an interesting topic and very timely because we're so dependent on the internet. But what we want to talk about is the vision and what was it, what have we done, and what may be the unintended consequences, and what do we do for the next 40 years, maybe. And so where are we? So in that note, we've got some excellent panelists, and many of whom were actually involved in building the internet and are involved in building the internet. So let's start with the first panelist. We have Dr. Paul Vixie, and I'm sure that he really needs no introduction. He is an internet pioneer. He's the chairman and CEO and co-founder of Farsight Security. He is in the Internet Hall of Fame for work related to DNS. He's written so many things, including Bind. He started the first anti-spam company, the first nonprofit internet infrastructure software company, and the first neutral and commercial internet exchange. I mean, it's just crazy, all these things. It's so funny to think about all the new things. I mean, all these things didn't exist, and yet they're they're the fabric of what we do on a day-to-day basis. And so, the one thing that I'm going to say to all of you is thank you. Thank you for all your work in building the internet. So next. Next, we have Dr. Henning Schulzrinne from Columbia. And Henning also is an internet pioneer. He's in the Internet Hall of Fame, and mostly for his work in IP telephony. He was a co-author of SIP, RTP, RTSP, all the things that we now know as IP telephony. He was also CTO of the FCC. He's been at AT&T Bell Labs, and he's at Columbia now, one of our finest institutions. And just on a personal level too, I mean, I think, and I'll say this for both Paul and Henning, some of the smartest people I've ever met and some of the nicest. And so again, thank you to you guys. Okay, next. So then we have Deepak Maheshwari. Deepak was co-founder of Nixie. Nixie is the Indian National Internet Exchange. It's what gives the IP addresses to all of India. And you know, I'm going to say we're so honored that Deepak is becoming more and more involved with IIESoc. In fact, he's going to be running that last panel that we have closing out for about India and the internet. So he's going to be moderating that. And he brings an interesting interplay to this whole area, which is the intersection of policy and technology. And this is something actually that is for the next at least 10 years is going to be one of the biggest issues that we have going forth. How do we do this? What do we do about encryption policy? What do we do about privacy policy? What about content moderation? And it's people like Deepak who can be very, very involved in guiding it, because he also has public policy expertise, and as well as being a technologist, he knows the legal aspect. And on a personal level, I know when one of the other panelists and I were in India, Deepak spent the whole day in New Delhi, taking us around, driving us to all the different ministries, he and his driver, and then having a wonderful lunch as well. So glad to have Deepak on board. Next. Then we have Nagin Duraswami. And, you know, I'm going to put Naganand on the spot in some of these issues. Naganand he's a venture capitalist. He started off as an entrepreneur, and then he co-founded IdeaSpring Capital. And it really tries to fund very, very imaginative startups that can have global impact. And as you guys know, I mean, money makes the world go round, right? In a lot of ways. And so you've got to have money. So as I say, we're going to be putting Naganand on the spot to answer some of these questions about how funding has helped to build the internet and where do we go with it. Okay, so thank you, Naganand. Okay, thank you for letting us put you on the spot. And then last but not least is someone who's becoming one of my dearest friends, is Cathy Aronson. She's the chairperson of our board for Industry Network Technology Council. And she's done a ton of stuff, both as an engineer on the Merit Network. She's helped develop products and was VP of architecture at a software company. She's also been on the ARIN Advisory Council for many years. And in fact, she's the IETF reporter for ARIN. And she's also one of the folks who is very, very supportive of women in technology. She's co-founder of NetGirls and also very active in the IETF Sisters. And I know on a personal level, she has really been nothing but supportive of me from when I wandered into the IETF and was getting laughed at by everybody. And it was due to people like Cathy that I stopped crying all the time and actually managed to get a few things done. So thank you, Cathy. But with that, let's go ahead and start. Let's talk about some of these questions. So what we've got here is questions, and feel free to put in your own questions too in the Q&A. And folks, the audience, you can upvote questions, and we'll get a chance at the end to ask. So, first question. We've not only connected the world, we've made spreading ideas cheap and easy. Before, it was very difficult. You know, you had to actually spend some money. Now, with a click of a button, you can send it. But the unintended consequences of all this is that it's very cheap and easy to disseminate misinformation. You can see this both in India and the US, all over the world in some of our political industry. So what do we do? What do we do about this? And Paul, I'm going to start with you then first, if you might speak to this for a couple of minutes.
Sure, happy to do so. And thank you again for inviting me today. So there is an equilibrium in every transaction, whether it's a one-to-one or one-to-many or many-to-one. There's a point at which the transaction will not take place if the cost is too high. And the cost is not just in dollars, right? We are all familiar with the aphorism that if you're not paying for something on the internet, you're probably the product, your personal information. We have sort of the big problem we have with misinformation because a lot of people, and I include myself here, I'm not trying to be holier than anybody. A lot of people want to hear something friendly to whatever views they had previously. And the internet has made it possible for creators of information, whether corporations, advertising companies, governments, to have enough information about each of us that they know what we will be most willing to hear. So the capability of targeting the message is better than it's ever been in the history of communication for humanity. And our ability to understand sort of how we're being targeted and to recognize targeted misinformation when it comes our way is lower than it's ever been. So there's a huge asymmetry. And what happens with market forces is not unlike what happens in biological systems. If it is something that will benefit you, then you'll do it. And if it's benefiting your competitor, you'll do it. So there really isn't a way for everybody to agree, this is possible, but it would create a worse world for everybody. So let's just not do it. That's not happening. That's never going to happen. So it's kind of an open-ended problem where it's causing a lot of harm, and that you can see that harm all over the world in terms of the political systems, which are kind of unable to cope with this level of engagement between sources of misinformation and all of us who are kind of wanting to be spoken to about our own pet issues. And so this is kind of an unforeseen side effect of the internet, right? We wanted everybody to be able to communicate. We didn't want bottlenecks. Well, now we've got it.
Thank you, Paul. Henning, what about you?
So let me just to build on Paul's comments a little bit. We used to have a clear division between what traditionally used to be called mass media, so radio, TV, and large newspapers, and personal media, what your telephone or sending mail, or maybe small, like mimeographed newsletters, things of that nature that almost by definition, the latter just didn't scale very well, as we like to say in that. And so there were plenty of cranks in publishing mimeographed sheets that were distributed by a self-addressed stamped envelope when you listen to some late night radio show where you could hear about the latest shenanigans in Area 51 for UFOs or whatever conspiracy topic that you might be interested in. but because you had to send in a stamp in an envelope, the distribution cost was extremely high. The internet has essentially removed the distinction between mass media and these type of personal media without the regulatory and societal constraints that are there. Newspapers, they without flaw, but they had built-in economic incentives to provide both reasonable balance and reasonable accuracy, usually because there was only one or two in town, and if you didn't want to lose all your responsible advertisers, you couldn't go off too deeply off a deep end. Right now, and I would say this is not a problem just of individual kind of random people spouting misinformation. It is a small number of well-positioned, high impact, high follower count individuals and organizations with combined with the, as Paul was hinting at, an engagement-based mechanism where the companies have decided that's in their economic interest to promote either certain individuals or certain high engagement where lots of people click on it type of stuff. And those are choices the companies make. This is not something that individuals can fix, except possibly by changing the economic incentives of those companies or possibly the regulatory environment for those companies.
Thank you, Henning. Deepak, what about you?
So first of all, I would say that when we are talking about truth, I think truth itself philosophically is very different from facts. So facts, yes, I would say to some extent one can look at. Truth is a much more profound and much more esoteric concept, I would say. That's the first point. All the same, what Henning just mentioned, I think that's a very important aspect. The very constraint in terms of bandwidth in the case of internet in the original days, this is something which created this whole model that we could, if I had to send, let's say, 4 emails to a single organization, if I were sending it in a normal postal system, I would put them in 4 different envelopes and send that same communication, but in 4 different envelopes from my side, and I'll pay 4 times. However, on the internet, what was happening was that I would pay for the bandwidth. I'll consume very little bandwidth at my end. It will go to the server of the recipient, and then it will get replicated. So this was the original constraint model. And that's something which is getting reflected, however, even today, when we have enormous bandwidths and storage and computing and everything else. Because these protocols as such have not fundamentally changed in terms of the way they are being designed. And that's why we have we had this problem of spam, which to a great extent got sorted out. It continues, but it's more of an irritant, I would say, right now than so much of a danger. However, when we come to things like deep fakes and many other things, these type of things are really, I'll say at times they can be very dangerous also, not just for fun or anything like that. But the basic thing that people who are indulging in these type of practices, it's actually not about technology. What they are playing up is with the minds, because they do realize that, okay, if I send out this type of provocative or such and such type of message, there are a whole lot of people who are likely to either lap it up. There are a whole lot of people who may or may not know whether it's a fact, but still they are very likely to comment, share, forward, or do something about it. And those are the type of incentive structures, as was mentioned by Henning also just now and Paul, that we have these type of incentives. And these incentives are not just in terms of dollar or rupee value, but those incentives could be in terms of how many likes you got, how many times your messages sort of get forwarded and other things. So I think those are the fundamental things that we need to look at from a human psychological perspective. And at the same time, I think going forward, what we do need is we need more and more brokers of facts We need alternate media. We need websites and other experts who can act as honest brokers or checkers of these type of viral videos and others. The fact is, there'll always be many more number of pieces of information that will be uh, sort of fakes or other type of things than one can possibly look at and determine whether they are not. So ultimately, it will fall down. It will come down to everybody's individual experience, their own value system. So yes, AI, ML, etc., would come in handy once in a while. To some extent, these things will help, but the fact is that AI is also being used to generate deep feeds. So I think beyond technology, we also need to look at policy as well as a human value system. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you so much, Deepak. Okay, next question, please. Okay, so now I'm going to put Naganand on the spot. So venture capital wants to make profits, but what's being funded is rarely considered. For example, this is the question says he recently attended a conference where an entrepreneur was talking about the latest effort for online gambling websites. I mean, whom does that exactly profit other than, a lot of people's bottom lines? So what about this, Naganand? What are your thoughts on this whole question? Does venture capital have responsibility?
So of course it does, and it also has the responsibility of making profits. I mean, that's not the end all for a venture capitalist, because it's driven by profit certainly, and so are public companies. But I guess as an investor, I would also say that there is a lot of social responsibility also goes with it. I think the challenge that venture capitalists also have is there's always good associated with bad and vice versa, right? You take any example. Facebook started by saying, all right, a group of college kids should kind of communicate or know what each other is doing. But who knew at that time, 10 years ago, that it would become a full-scale internet behemoth where all kinds of things, a lot of things happen, and with a lot of negative connotation, where it is to the point where it's become addictive, right? And it's very hard, I would say, when you look at investing, to look at all the negatives that might come with it, because there are a lot of positives that are associated with anything that you fund. And by nature, when you say venturing, you're trying something new. And we all know that when you're trying something new, it's not always obvious what negative things can come out of it. For example, if you have to take facial recognition, you can easily use it for contactless getting into the flight, boarding, nothing, right? You don't touch anything, you don't do anything. In the airport, you go in, it recognizes your face, knows who you are, and lets you in, and people will love that feeling. But flip it and use the same technology for surveillance, all hell breaks loose. So all I'm trying to say is, of course, there is a lot of social thought that goes in, but it's almost impossible to predict, how the technology is used, right? Sometimes it can be used to do a lot of good. And the flip side, the same technology can be used for doing a lot of bad as well, because we don't want surveillance. Because very rarely it's a cut and dry case, right? For example, even if you take gene editing and things like that, you can say, look, cloning is bad because we really don't understand what implications it can have. And we clearly can say at that point of time is we are not ready for this technology yet. But at the same time, you take gene editing, it can cure a lot of diseases that could not have been cured before. You invest or you don't invest, right? So I think so. I would say that, yeah, it's not the end all. You need the venture capitalists. I would argue strongly for it. Although I'm a recent venture capitalist, I'm not been doing it for a long time. But there's a lot of value to it, and there are examples like in the question, there's a question on gambling sites. Sometimes people say it's better to have legalized gambling than not have have gambling somewhere else, right? So it's better to bring it online and collect taxes and make it legal than do it somewhere else. People who want to gamble will gamble anyways. So what do you want to do with it? So there are, again, in the same gambling website question, I can see pros and cons for it. So overall, I would say, hence, look, venture capitalists are in the business of creating something new, investing in some new exciting technology that's going to come in. And most of them have social values. They think about the society. But it's just so happens that sometimes you really can't predict where this technology can lead you to 10 years down the road, at which time I think societal policies and civic sense has to prevail. Like the first question we had, the discussion on what's happening with respect to all this communication, negativity in elections, and how are the elections being influenced by using social media. I know there has to be ways and means to figure out how to track those, how to better those, but you cannot say, we should not fund a system like that. So I think that's what I would say. In closing, I would say, look, there's a lot of social consciousness, with the venture capitalists, but the kind of games that the kind of business you are in, it's very hard to predict when you are investing what are the pros and cons of something you're investing in, because it's never clear. Including the Manhattan Project, all the scientists who worked on it later repented on it. And same thing with Facebook founders, the guys who actually built the system. A few of them are saying, why the hell did we build the system? So I think this is an ongoing thing, and there will be self-corrections along the way.
Thank you so much, Naganand. Yeah, in fact, that's the whole question, isn't it? I mean, we've built this internet, and now what? Okay, next question, please. Yeah. Naganand, this one is for you as well. How do we make sure that unintended consequences are factored into the time of technology development and standardization? So you've talked about doing some of this. Well, then, do you have any suggestions on exactly how we might do it?
So Nalini, I think it's a hard thing. It's impossible to say. Like I said, we are investing in something that we believe will do good in the future. There are some investments that we can make, our technology we can look at and say, look, this is bad, let's not do it. Like the example I gave before, say about cloning. But I will not stop funding facial recognition systems, because it can be used for surveillance. There are a lot of good things. It can be used for attendance. It can be used for check-ins in the airport. A lot of good use cases for it. So, and then same thing can be said about, there's a lot of changes that are happening, like food in the labs, right? Beyond Meat and companies like that. Those are again good things, but you might have negative implications further down the road. But are you going to stop investing or going to stop looking at those technologies now, saying something might happen 10 years down the road? And you don't know. Like for example, COVID vaccine. It's not well tested. Are you going to take it or not take it? It's a question. And this is sometimes you have to balance it delicately, because there's no straightforward answers and deterministic answers to all these questions. So when you're investing in the future, there's a lot of non-determinism associated with that. And you make a best guess based on what you know at this point of time. You can't predict what's going to happen 5-10 years down the road. And take a guess based on your best knowledge today, and you have to invest based on that. You have to invest in technology, and the main difference between humans and animals is our brain, which means you have to be innovating all the time. There's 7 billion people thinking all the time, so there is going to be a lot of stuff, good stuff coming out, and you got to take a chance at it, unless and until it's very, very clear that this technology is completely bad. Like for example, like a same example used of cloning. But you have to take a chance. You have to take the risk. Otherwise, we as mankind or humanity will stop making forward progress, and we can't afford that.
Thank you. Next question. Okay. This is a question which I think some of you have touched on in your previous answers. The internet spans national borders, but really there's no international policy body. There are yes, there are some, but I mean, how do I say it? For example, the ITU. There's the ITU, but there's no enforcement power for the ITU. A lot of jurisdictions now, Europe with GDPR, California with its privacy policy, many people, India has encryption policy. And so how do we do this? Cathy, do you want to talk to this?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? I think I'm off mute.
Yep.
For this question, I have a friend who does this policy stuff for his job, and I spent some time talking to him because I'm no policy expert, but it's fascinating to me that we have like Nalini said, the GDPR and the EU, and they have they're all coordinated and they have a policy, and in order to do business in the EU, you have to abide by their rules. But in the U.S., apparently there are 25 different states or 26 different states that are coming up with their own policy regarding data privacy and all sorts of stuff on the internet. And none of them, you can't just abide by the GDPR and think that like Tennessee is going to be also included in that. You have to actually pay attention to all these different jurisdictions that you're going to do business in or have data in. And I think as a country, at least in the US and around the world, we have to start coming up with a uniform code of how we police these things and what the policies are. Otherwise, it's just going to be really, really hard to do business and succeed as an enterprise or anybody just trying to do stuff on the internet. At INTC, we're starting to look at this too, because we have to make sure everything that we do abides by whatever the laws are that we do it in. So I think we really need to, start lobbying or doing something to, get some more cohesive policies that have a little bit of teeth.
Thank you, Cathy. And then now Henning. Now, one thing Henning, I think, brings a different perspective to this, because he was just recently staffed to one of our senators, Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon. So Henning, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think there are two kind of cases that I'm seeing. So one, like Cathy was mentioning, is the privacy regulation, or in the US, the absence thereof. There you have an interesting dynamic going on, namely that companies have been saying what you've, Cathy, have been saying, that we need a national law. It's just too difficult to conform to all these individual laws. Yet all the proposals that industry is willing to support are so weak that they're basically useless. So they're basically just a little bit better disclosure, maybe some modest limitations at the edges, but they don't change the basic arrangement from a consumer perspective. Probably just what you get is more boxes to click on a website that you don't understand what the consequence is, and with no legal enforceability and all of that. So the states, as much as one might dislike that, actually have been helpful in the sense that they have essentially counterbalanced the inherent weakness of consumer advocacy at the federal level, where simply industry speaking collectively, and this is really across, not just across finance, this is across kind of a tech industry, has, with a few exceptions, been extremely reluctant to commit to anything substantial that changes the business model, that doesn't just involve pretend privacy. And so the states have essentially been a counterbalance, because they provide an incentive for the companies to be a little bit more forthcoming, shall we say, and a little bit more accommodating to consumer concerns about privacy. So I see it as a necessary. It's messy, it's not helpful in terms of efficiency, it's confusing to consumers. it's bad in the long term, but it is probably the only way we're going to get somewhat consumer-friendly law or regulation passed at the federal level. And this is probably true in other countries as well. The GDPR really has been useful in that sense, that it has provided a baseline where companies could no longer say, well, this is impossible to comply with, because they do it in Europe and they seem to somehow survive. And encryption regulation is a different matter, because there you have much more issues like procurement issues. You have domain and sector specific regulation. When we've had in the US, we had CALEA for law enforcement access to voice communication. I think that's a much more unsettled one, simply because you have more different, and probably this will remain the case, where different countries make different trade-offs based on kind of their constitutional norms and their political situation as to where they draw the balance. And I don't see any hope, and actually probably it's not even a good idea to have a uniform approach to that, simply because there are legitimate policy and legitimate political differences between different countries. The constitutional environment in the US is just a very different one than in Europe. For example, First Amendment law, First Amendment issues don't exist to the same extent in Europe. For example, there's a different level of trust between law enforcement and larger body politic, and so on. So I don't see that going for a global encryption regulation is either possible nor even desirable. For privacy, I do see a convergence because the incentives are aligned, but it will be messy because it's essentially a negotiation taking place in public between industry that doesn't want to do anything and states that seem to be more willing to step up in the US.
Thank you, Henning. Great information, and you can tell that you have a lot of on-the-ground experience. Paul, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think Henning hit it right, but I want to focus in a little bit on one thing he mentioned, which was enforceability. So legislation in general is supposed to have the flavor of don't do bad things. Then we get into an argument about what bad is and whether something is or is not bad. So fairly often we will hear a debate where the needs or the rights of individual people, real persons, are pitted against the rights or interests of corporate persons. And I can remember a couple of different US presidents now saying, yeah, we don't want to defend the environment too well because that'll kill the economy. And what some of us might like to ask is, what kind of economy do you think we're going to have if everybody is up to their neck in warm mud because we didn't defend the environment? And what that question highlights is the fact that there's not an incentive for the people who are creating this legislation to think long-term. They are thinking to the next election or maybe the one after that. And the individuals are considerably interested in their own careers, even though, of course, they speak in glowing terms about the importance of individual citizens during those election cycles. So, when we talk about enforceability, and let's get away from the question, what is bad, because everybody's got their own view on that. If you have legislation that can't be enforced, then you might as well not have it. It might actually do more harm than good, because its existence will fill a vacuum and sort of put off the opportunity to make better and more enforceable legislation. So there are just a lot of things that work against this, and it shows that the borderless nature of the internet economy and the internet community was in no way anticipated by the nation-state model, the modern Westphalian nation-state model, thinks that you will have lines on the map indicating where your law applies or where you are responsible for enforcing it. So even if we had sort of the ability to get out there and enforce these things, I'll give you an example of how that doesn't work. It would be very hard to prove that you have standing, where you are actually going after some entity, user, company, whatever, and saying, hey, what you're doing violates our privacy law. And we don't like that. We're going to stop you. We're going to fine you. We're going to arrest you, whatever. So this does not work. And famously, some Silicon Valley tech companies would prefer to just continue to pay hundreds of millions of euros per year in fines than to actually comply with the intent of GDPR or things like GDPR. That's, in my opinion, why GDPR bases some of its fines on the turnover, the annual revenue of the company, so that it will scale to a size that will be painful no matter how big they are. But even that is not really moving the needle. There's a sort of huge incentive to keep doing whatever is working. But now I want to talk about the bright side of legislation. As some of you know, I started the first internet distributed reputation company. It was a little nonprofit anti-spam company here in California. And when we would talk to email senders and say, we really need you to get permission before you send this kind of email, what a lot of them would tell us was, yeah, we can't do that because our competitors don't have to do it and we will die. All that would happen if we comply with your requirements is that our assets will be bought after our bankruptcy by people who didn't behave the way you're demanding we behave. So could you please do something that will be the rising tide that lifts all boats? Can you make it so that none of our competitors can outcompete us based on non-compliance with your requirements? In other words, could we have a regulatory framework, please? Because they weren't dedicated to spamming, they were dedicated to their own continuity. And that is a responsibility that executive teams have to shareholders. So, I wasn't happy, but I at least understood what they were saying. And, this is 25 years ago, 23 years ago. So a lot has changed, but I got to say a lot has not. And if we could get some kind of legislative priority in place whose job was not so much to protect real people, and yeah, we should be protecting real people against predation by unreal or corporate people. But let's set that aside for a moment. If we could come up with regulation that was designed to make it possible for everybody to obey the same rules and to avoid sort of the unintended consequences, the negative externalities of draconian behavior, we might be able to convince the companies that we're trying to regulate here that actually this is in your best interest. It's going to take a couple of years to play out. Do you think you could look beyond the next quarter's results? Because we're going to have to describe what we want in terms of something that is not sort of all cost, no benefit. And I think we can, but it isn't really being shaped that way. Although Ron Wyden certainly does a good job of trying to explain why this is in everybody's best interests and isn't just feel-good legislation. Nevertheless, what we have right now is some very empowered, well-entrenched companies who don't want to be the one who behaves well while others do not. So it feels to me a little bit like the fight against big tobacco, which took decades and cost billions, and during which the government was so outgunned and outmanned by how many lawyers and how many filings and so forth that it was just going to be hard. But we eventually got something done. And I would like that to happen sooner. The internet makes everything happen sooner. Let's get this sooner than big tobacco was shown a more appropriate place in the world economy.
Paul, I can't thank you guys all enough. One of the conversations that Cathy and I have been having is what next, with all this. And so all the stuff you guys are saying makes a huge amount of sense. And so I hope that everybody all the audience as well as the panelists is do please stay engaged, because it is my hope that we will come up with something, just start taking some small steps to so what next? But anyway, but let me let you guys talk, but as I say, stay engaged. Deepak, so what are your thoughts?
So first of all, I would say that technology is global by design. Okay, by default it is global. So how a particular routing works in US, it will work in India, it will work in every other country also. But policy by design, again, because of the type of mandate, whether in terms of constitution or in terms of laws and others, it is local. And when I'm saying local, it means it could be national, it could be state, it could be even a city level thing for that matter. So this basic conundrum between the policy and the technology, I mean, what applies where and what is the scope, I think those tensions will continue to exist. However, despite the continuation of and the prevalence of such, I'll say, tensions in the system, we still need to find out ways and means in terms of doing certain things. So, for example, right now in the UN, we have a couple of interesting efforts going on. One is the UN Governmental Experts Group, and the other one is called the UN Open-Ended Working Group. And what they are trying to do is, of course, they are trying to define in terms of what are the cyber norms. So, for example, at what state and what type of attack, etc., could be constituted as, let's say, a war, and then what type of actions, etc., one could take. Now, those type of discussions are taking place at some fora. At the same time, the moment it comes to things like privacy or let's say even about content regulation, etc., I think there the cultural norms, the social norms, and the other existing policy structure of the respective country, they all come into play in a big way. And one of the biggest challenges, of course, is when it comes to encryption and things like that, is that the law enforcement and the security agencies and the intelligentsia, they do want access to unencrypted information. And this is something which does create a huge challenge to them. But at the same time, we have seen time and again that only breaking a strong encryption is not the only way. Of course, that could be necessary in certain situations, but that need not be the only thing for them to get that type of access. So I think this basic tension between technology and policy shall continue to exist. I don't think it's going to go away any day soon. But despite this, it would be useful for us to continue and endeavor towards working with the internet, which is free. And when I'm saying free, in terms of freedom of flow of data, so it's free, open, secure, and safe, and interoperable.
Thank you so much, Deepak. And then I'm just gonna, I'm gonna contain myself and not give an opinion on every question myself. But people, I'm telling you, one thing is just because there's no official, policy doesn't mean these decisions aren't being made. They're being made at the protocol level and a lot of it at the IETF. And so I'm just gonna stop myself there. And then, yeah. Next question, please. So, this is something which should hit home now because of the COVID and everybody being at home. And so the questioner says, I live in the rural United States. Fortunately, they have money, and so they have internet connectivity, but in a lot of places. And I can tell you, even in my area, the places where the farm workers live, high-speed internet is non-existent. Has this further widened the gap between the haves and the have-nots? Now, do you guys agree? Who should do this? You know, and what should we do? And Cathy, I'm going to start with you, please. Cathy, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I thought I was on mute. Total amateur mistake. Anyway, I do live in the rural US. You can see the open space and snow behind me. And here we have really, really spotty internet. So if you're in the right neighborhood, you know, you have pretty good connectivity. They're still trying to sell us high-speed DSL, but the central office is like 15 miles away, so it's never going to be high speed. And I don't know how many of you participate in the IETF, but before the IETF, there's a really great group that meets the Sunday before. It's called the IEPG, the Internet Planning. It's basically an operator group that's been meeting since a really long time before the IETF. And one of the guys gave a great presentation last time about, he lives just outside of Ann Arbor, Michigan, and there's no connectivity there. It's very rural. And he was looking at trying to, you know, because with COVID, all his neighbors, none of the kids have internet, so they can't do remote school. And so he looked at getting, you know, like getting connectivity from various places, and it was super expensive. So he actually filed and got his own tariff and made his own telco and dug for his own fiber and actually put in connectivity for all of his neighbors. And if it's that hard, you know, right outside of Ann Arbor, then, you know, in really remote, poor places, it must just be nearly impossible to have decent connectivity. But on a lighter note, I participate with this farm in the middle of nowhere in Arizona, and we started long ago with a satellite phone and a 9600 baud dial-up. And this year we actually had a full-on Zoom annual meeting with video to the farm. So we were pretty excited about that. But I just think that, you know, as a society, we need to make connectivity go to all these places. And the Gaia working group and the IETF is where all the community networks hang out. And in these rural areas, in a lot of countries, you know, they're making satellite dishes with woks, and, you know, like that you make stir fry in, and various other things, creative ways to make there be connectivity there too. And I'm not really sure what the answer is, like I said, this is my question, but I think that, you know, as a society, especially with things like COVID, we really need to start pushing to have connectivity to all these places so that kids can go to school and you know, progress can happen.
Thank you, Cathy. Naganand, what are your thoughts?
No doubt there is a dearth of internet availability in the rural areas, right? And then it's true, you know, take India, for example, 5 years ago, 27% was the coverage. Today it's 50% thanks to Geo, which has rolled out quite a bit, but still 50% of the population has no access to internet. Forget good internet, right? Forget high-speed internet. And that has become even more pronounced during COVID days because, you know, when kids have to access, do online school, even in urban areas, this has become a big problem. It is not only the issue with the internet in India, specifically, it's also an issue with devices. The kids don't have, you know, there's only one phone per family or one computer for family. So there's a lot of dearth of resources when you consider it that way. And I don't see any other way but internet becoming public good, right? And from an economic term, saying, you know, everybody needs to have access to it, and it has to be ubiquitous, and, you know, proper use of public economic term of public good is applicable to the internet. The question is, will the government then spend ensuring that all citizens have access to it, right? Or is it still going to be private entities providing to it? And that's a question. I really don't know what the answer to that question is, because obviously there is a lot of other issues involved, you know, costing and deployment and who's going to maintain it. So there are a whole bunch of things that's involved, but I strongly believe that should be public goods. I'll tell you why, because if you go even to the rural India now, the three fundamental things that are being used for you're doing remote health now, and agri-tech is becoming very, very widely used. So farmers are using it for trade, and farmers are using it for getting information, various kinds of information. And number three, the government is doing direct benefit transfers to all the people. So they need to have a digital bank account. Digital banks are becoming widely popular, and people need for finances. So the three fundamental requirements, include, and now education because of online. So it's like almost become like electricity now. Like in India, we're saying every house need to have electricity. It's coming down to every house needs to have internet connectivity as well. And so it is getting there, but I don't have an answer as to how to address the cost issue, right? That's something we have to think through.
Thank you, Naganand. Henning, what are your thoughts?
So this deserves a much longer discussion because, as usual, this is one of those complicated problems which defies a one paragraph answer. So let me try to summarize briefly maybe a few topics. First of all, I don't think it is helpful to just think of it as a rural problem. This is a problem in the United States, at least, in low-income urban areas just as well. What's sometimes called digital redlining, where carriers and to some extent also private property owners, rental property owners have not upgraded the last 100 feet type of infrastructure to provide high-speed access. And then there's obviously an affordability component to that as well. Because when we talk about rural broadband or even urban broadband, it is generally, at least in the US and in many other countries, not the case that you cannot get broadband at all. You can certainly in rural areas get satellite, but it is both expensive and tends to be low performing in that. So when we talk about broadband, we really have to talk not just about, is there some kind of broadband physically available? The answer is probably yes. But more interesting question, is it available at a reliability and performance level that allow us to do all the things that Naganand, for example, is talking about, and is it affordable to the people living there? So there have been plenty of attempts to support rural broadband. I'm speaking particularly about the US. The US spends at least $2 billion a year and has been doing this for a decade plus, probably longer, on rural broadband subsidies, primarily to initially the incumbent providers in that. That has often not worked out very well. Many of the networks that were subsidized were DSL networks that supported 4 megabits down and 1 megabit up on a good day. And they were basically obsolete before the subsidy ran out. And that this was not, I would not blame the regulator for that. This was based on industry advocacy. This is not stupid people who don't understand technology. This was people who were convinced by the companies, incumbents, who preferred to extend the lifetime of their DSL and copper networks to subsidize their deployment. And there was a notion of better than nothing. Basically, well, we give people 4 megabits and they should be happy about that because that's better than not having it at all. I'll raise one point that is, I think, becoming common, and introduction to the topic addressed this a little bit. I think Cathy alluded to this as well, is in many cases now, whether you have internet or not in rural areas depends most strongly not on national policy, that it depends on whether there is an organization or a group of citizens who are willing and able, as in they have the resources, the technical knowledge, the connections to set up a their own broadband provider. Since typically the large-scale incumbent has no interest in serving those areas, is there a rural electric cooperative? Is there a nonprofit that gets established? Is there a school district that's willing to do that? Is there a library that's willing to do that? So funding can sometimes be found. But you have to have the human resources. So it's basically the places that are well connected and well resourced in a kind of human resources and political sense. They can kind of work around that. But places that lack those for whatever reason, either because of institutional inertia, or they just aren't the kind of places, kind of institutions available in that, they are left behind. So this is not just add some money, because typically grant funding, for example, goes to places who can apply for grants, who have the resources to do the planning and all of that. So that this is a larger problem than just add some additional kind of funding to a problem that will go away, unless we find ways for all those areas to have the institutional resources in that. And so I'll give as an example, in the US, after rural electrification, was the same problem in the 1930s, where very few farms had electricity. And within a relatively short time period, 10 years, I mean, we've been working on rural broadband for longer than that. Many, if not most, farms had electricity, but that required a uniform federal effort. That required also uniform federal planning, and in some cases required setting institutions such as the Tennessee Valley Authority that had the scale and the institutional capacity to build those networks. Just kind of sprinkling money on random rural electrics is better than nothing, but it's not to substitute for something a bit more coordinated.
Thank you, Henning. All these questions, we could talk for hours on all of them, but thank you. Deepak, what are your thoughts?
So, for example, what we have seen in terms of as it is, as Naga mentioned earlier, so in India, a lot of people still do not have internet access, leave aside what type of access. And in the COVID times, what we have seen is that it has actually been accentuated in certain cases significantly. So, for example, we already had this whole, I'll say, gender divide in terms of huge gender disparity in terms of access. And also we had this, of course, spatial thing in terms of rural, urban, or even in some of the slums, etc., in big cities as well. But the other thing that we need to look at is this. On one hand, the government of India has been doing a lot of work, especially on the supply side. So on the supply side, they have schemes in terms of establishing towers, in terms of taking fiber to villages, and that work is going on apace. Of course, a bit slow than the targets, but it's happening. And even on this 15th of August, the Independence Day, Prime Minister did mention that all the villages in India will be connected with broadband in a few years' time. And that's a good thing. But I think what's happening is the USO fund, two things are happening there. Number one, the total corpus of the USO fund in India is actually increasing every year, which is not a good thing. Normally, I would say if some particular fund is increasing, it's a good thing, but not something like USO fund. That means we are not consuming it as fast as we should be able to do it, and because the money is already sitting there. So that's one problem. Second thing is, for most of the focus is only on the supply side interventions. That is, okay, build more towers, put more fiber and things like that. There's not any big, large scale scheme from the government in terms of providing low cost handsets to people where it is needed. So it is only about supplying the bandwidth in a way. And second is, what about the capacity building in terms of how you have to use it? And when we are saying about using the devices, it is not about consuming the content which has been produced by somebody else, whether it's a news or a video or anything else. I think what's important is that we need to look at people as prosumers, which was a term which was coined by Alvin Toffler almost 50 years back in his book Future Shock in 1970. That is, he said, in future, people will be producing as well as consuming. And I think that's how we should look at people today, not only as passive users of content which has been provided or developed by somebody else, but also about having an active role in producing the content, also having an active citizenry in that sense. And the second aspect is related to the network design itself. Traditionally, when the internet started, it was a symmetric design. So the upload and the download speeds were same. And with the advent of the web in the early 90s, it became extremely asymmetric. So we had things like, for example, on the dial-up, people would talk about 1:10, 1:4, and those type of, that is, your download speed was 4 times than your upload speed. I think today, again, we are coming to a situation that increasingly internet, the basic infrastructure design itself needs to be more symmetric. I'm saying not exactly symmetric, but I'm talking about more symmetric than what it has traditionally been. And that, of course, means that some of the ways, in terms of the way the systems are designed, in ways the protocols are designed, in ways the devices and the spectrum and other type of things are allocated. I think that's, again, we need to look at. And the last thing that I would say is that the government should look at, especially when it comes to things like spectrum and right of way, etc. As again, Naga mentioned about as a public good. So I would say is the government starts using these as public good itself, just these basic things, which is, let's say, the radio waves, the right of way, and these type of numbering resource, etc., and making that available easily and in an affordable manner to the service providers who want to utilize them. That itself will be a huge plus point, because otherwise what happens is, if the government takes too much of money for spectrum, if the government takes too much of money for, or any other agencies, they take too much of money for the right of way, the services inevitably become extremely costly. So that's another way to look at in terms of making these things more democratic. So two things. One is in terms of, in addition to the supply side interventions, look at the supply side, demand side also, and also in terms of capacity building. So how do people start using these devices, and how do people make content, how do people share that content, and how do people remain safe and secure?
Okay, thank you so much. Next question, please. Let me do this. One of the things is, this is kind of adding on to the questions that we were just talking about. I just got a reminder that we're gonna stop at 9:30, so we have about 40 minutes. Yeah. Am I doing that right? Yeah. So anyway, if I could get you guys to keep your answers a bit shorter. I mean, it's been wonderful, but we can't go on for as many hours as I'd love to. But so anyway, so I'm going to keep my answer I'm not going to read the question because I think everybody can read it. And so basically, it's about, well, so what do we do? Do you have any concrete suggestions on how we go forth? And Henning, let's start with you. So what do we do? But I mean, like, are there, do we do better CDNs? Yeah.
So there's clearly both policy regulation type advances, which I won't talk about for this particular question. Let me just add one item which I don't think has been considered all that much. So there, on the positive side, a lot of rural areas in the US have gotten higher speed broadband through fixed wireless providers in the last 5 years or so. Those are probably the most entrepreneurial local providers. They have the advantage they can start with a relatively small amount of capital investment. You start with a radio tower and one transmitter and a fiber connection, and you're in business. At least you can serve a few dozen customers, say, and then accumulate customers and revenue in that. And the reason that has worked is that the devices that are used for that have become both cheaper and easier to manage. So one of the kind of conundrums is that we talk a lot about the capital investment, kind of the fiber and the radio and stuff, but even for most rural operations, a very large fraction of their cost, particularly for small scale, is due to the cost of simply operating the network. Network management, customer support, all of that. You can easily burn the monthly revenue from a user by spending an hour with that person on the phone, debugging their what turns out to be a home Wi-Fi problem. So what I think would be useful, particularly for many of the smaller providers, are networks that are easier to manage and can be readily managed at larger scale, so that some of those management tasks can be outsourced, and also that are easier to self-install. One of the largest costs of running networks is not the running of a fiber down the street, or even less so long distance fiber. It's having a technician come to every household and spend half a day drilling through walls and installing wiring and doing all the other things that it takes to do that. So having networks that largely can be self-installed by users, that can be managed by low sophistication operations that don't have a deep tech expertise, and that can be where you can separate management like a NOC type of operation from just the on-the-ground operation, kind of more of a franchise model that one might imagine, where you do the cooking locally, but you do the provisioning and the technology centrally. Those are, I think, 3 areas that can help make networks be more readily deployable in rural areas.
No, that's absolutely wonderful, Henning. It's something. I mean, the embedded intelligence and networking comes to mind, but I'm going to stop now. Deepak, what are your thoughts?
I think when it comes to these type of issues, I mean, there's no silver bullet, obviously. So what we do need to look at is that, I mean, so yes, fixed wireless is something that has been tried in India also a long time back. But I think currently the way things are, perhaps even a mobile type of thing might work well. And beyond that, I think, for example, when we are looking at things like 5G or even beyond that, let's say 6G, can we do a flip design? And what I mean by flip design is this. Normally normally any new technology, it starts from big metros, from developed countries, etc. And then slowly it finds its way after a decade, maybe after 5 years, maybe after a decade or decade and a half, to the villages of, let's say, in India or in Africa, even beyond that. Can we do a flip design, that design it in a manner that the best business cases, the best use cases perhaps could start from rural areas first, and then slowly there's something that could come in cities? I know it's a counterfactual thinking, but that's the way.
Thank you so much, Deepak. Very interesting. And now I can see why we're running behind on questions. There's so much to talk about. Next question, please. Another one which we could take an entire session on. Okay, so there's so much information. How do we know what the heck it is? And then you know, and people blindly forwarding crazy, you know, Looney Tune WhatsApp stuff. What do we do? Paul, what are your thoughts?
So we who live near cities and who sometimes go to parties or restaurants have learned that you've got to be very suspicious about where you park your car and sort of what is your body language as you walk down the street. And you've got to be ready to ignore panhandlers or muggers or whatever. And that the internet has to sprout some parallel of all of that. We all have to understand that the moment we sign on, the moment we start a web browser, we are seen as a potential victim by an awful lot of adversarial people and places and things. And the reason I'm saying we need to become more suspicious, more aware, more threat aware, is because the alternative is to try to understand the world. And none of us is going to get there. None of us is going to be able to do that. We will not have AI servants that will somehow take a look at our current environment, tell us whether in that moment we should currently be worried about something. That's not going to happen. So given that we're not going to be able to learn the level of selectivity, we're unfortunately going to just have to become borderline paranoid in order that the internet does not sort of become the falling tide that strands all boats. And I don't like saying that. When I failed at the first internet reputation company back in the mid-90s, what I realized is that because I failed, we were doomed to have gated communities. It's very difficult to spam somebody with a Gmail account, and that's because they have a strong wall around it. That means that if you want that level of protection and you're not willing to submit yourself to the surveillance capitalist world, you're out of luck. There isn't an alternative for you. So the internet has turned all of us into a global threat surface. We're all vulnerable. Our devices, I mentioned earlier about our susceptibility to misinformation. We are a gigantic pot of honey for people who wish us ill. And there won't be a way to push them back. There won't be a way to be situationally aware of the threats. We're just going to have to treat the whole thing like a slum, crime infested, and the people who can now talk to us are people we would never choose to be in the same room with. But in the internet, you are in the same room with everybody. Sorry to be so grim.
No. Cathy, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I totally agree with Paul. They say that a lie can travel around the world before the truth wakes up in the morning, and we all have to get a lot smarter about what we post and what we believe, and the comments that we read and listen to. And I have just so many friends here in Wyoming who, because it's on the internet, they believe it. And we all need to get that situational awareness that Paul was talking about, like, that guy's following me, maybe I should tell him to bug off. And I know some of the social media companies are getting better at policing misinformation, but then, who's the policer? And if they're, do we trust the person who's policing the truth or not? So it's really a complex problem.
Thank you, Cathy. Naganand, did you want to speak to this a bit?
Yeah, I just like to add, I agree with both what Paul and Cathy said. I categorize it as digital waste. It's like garbage. There's too much digital waste out there in the world. And, we all work based on trust. So you really need to be careful, whom do you trust. To Paul's point, you have to go to websites or places that has high integrity and you can believe what they're saying. And even forwarded messages, my friends forward me a lot of WhatsApp messages they get, and it's meaningless to me, because I ask them, is this the content you wrote or is the content you forwarded? I just tell them, don't forward me stuff unless until you have written it, right? So unwritten rule in many of our WhatsApp group is no more forwarded messages. Either put original content, or if you're forwarding something, tell you're forwarding. So I will ignore that message completely, right? So I think we are going through a lot of junk today, and 99% of what is out there is digital waste, and there's no easy solution. It is because we all want to consume a lot of information, and like they say, it's addictive. People, they post something, and the next moment they see how many people have liked it. There is some pleasure. It's well proven that you get highs by looking at that. So we live in a crazy world. But you have to figure out how to be sane in this crazy digital world.
Thank you. Next question, please. Yeah, this is for Cathy. This is about conspiracy theories. So, I mean, the world is very this is all very complex. The internet is complex. Technology is complex. And so does do people have a predisposition now to believe conspiracy theories? Cathy, what do you think?
Well, recently I have reconnected with an old friend of mine who's convinced that in 2030, they are all coming to take all our private property. And the journey of peeling the layers off of her logic has just been fascinating to me. I mean, I won't belabor it, but she's just convinced, somebody did something that was basically just some innocent predictions for the future. And it's become this whole conspiracy theory on how there'll be no more private property and, all kinds of stuff about vaccines and various things. And the thing that I found most fascinating was the real news, what I would consider a real news source. She would point to it and say, oh, even they're talking about it, even though their article had nothing to do with her conspiracy theory. Just the fact that Time magazine had an article that had some sentence that sort of sounded like what she was talking about. She used that to validate her conspiracy theory. And I tell you, this is pretty scary stuff. I mean, and Nalini and I were talking a few days ago about this, and in some countries, these things get people killed. Because, all of a sudden you think your neighbor is, some person who's going to come and do whatever in the middle of the night. And so we really, just like all the other topics we've been talking about, I mean, there really needs to be some way to stop this, but I don't really know. I mean, there's always been conspiracy theories and there's always been that sort of thing, but they can spread so much faster now.
Yep. Thank you. Next question. Okay, this is I can't see who the speakers are to this, the panelists. Can you raise that a little bit? Yeah, thank you. Okay, yeah, okay, Paul. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so this is basically this question is upon wage inequality. I mean, it's taken advantage of the fact that because of the internet, I can go hire somebody for way cheaper. So do national borders matter anymore? Paul, what do you think?
So national borders don't matter, really. The economy, the culture, the language, the ability to form partnerships or be affected by disinformation, all flies right over. When we had the bird flu 10 years ago, however long ago that was, we had the situation of, you've got very strict passport control on the ground, but what have you got in the air that is going to keep this pathogen out of your portion of the map around which lines have been drawn? And this is chilling, because what this means is that every person, every business has to defend themselves against attacks from outside the country. And that was not true in the kinetic era. I've never had to have an anti-aircraft gun on the roof of my office building, because I never had to worry about somebody coming, maybe Canada or whatever, would fly an airplane down and drop bombs on me. That was just not a thing. But now it is, not Canada per se, but anybody, anywhere. Nation state attackers, deep-pocketed sort of people with a lot of patience, a lot of persistence, can come after anybody. And there's nothing that our police or our fire departments or our militaries can do about it. Now, there are countries in the world who have tried to say, actually, the line on the map that represents our border is present in cyberspace. And so you see that, for example, with the Great Firewall of China. And, it's interesting to imagine that if China had elections, they would probably be less subject to disinformation from outside of China, because they don't allow Facebook there. But I don't think that's our solution. I don't think that what we really need to do is to give nations a border that extends into cyberspace and gives them responsibility to stop attacks that are coming from outside that economy. I think we need to do something else. We need to embrace the borderless nature of this. And right now, no one is doing that. We are still proceeding as though nations were defined the way that Westphalia tradition defines them. And they're not. That era is gone, and that goneness remains unacknowledged.
Nugget, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm a believer in being open, right? Because I think this is more economic question than anything else, because it has a weird way of balancing things. Like for the example that is quoted here, yeah, you get programmers cheap in other country compared to US, but the implication of that is there's a lot more consumption of other goods. Like you buy more cars, you drink more Coke, you eat more chocolates. So, when you're losing out in one area, there's a significant gain in the other area. So I think economy has a very, in its own way, it kind of balances things out. The only thing I would say is, but it has to be open and transparent, right? It cannot be monopoly, and then it has to be fair. And then there are organizations like the World Trade Organization and other organizations to kind of make sure that this is fair. But in spite of it, we know of instances as we speak where it's kind of it's tilted towards one nation as opposed to other, without naming nations, because of various policies and because of various controls, which are not as transparent as it should be. So what is more important, hence, is not how much is being paid or what is being done, but how transparently and openly this is done, and to ensure that the economic order is maintained. I think that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. And next question. Okay. This is about consumerism. Yeah, Cathy, do you want to talk to this? I mean, so much junk and bubble wrap. Oh my gosh. What are your thoughts?
Well, I live someplace rural, and so we're notorious for our online ordering even before COVID, and we get really excited because we'd get like a office, like a generic chain office store, and you'd think you could go in there and maybe buy an envelope, and then you'd go in, and in the beginning they would have all the stuff you wanted, but then they realized kind of that everybody orders stuff online. So when you go in, they still don't have anything, and they say, oh, we can order that for you. And it's like, well, I can order that for me too. So we're really online shoppers here. And then I think COVID has made it a lot worse. I mean, I've noticed that a lot more of the packaging is more recyclable than it used to be, but there are so many problems with recycling. And, I think in the cities, with same day delivery, maybe there's not as much packaging, but I don't really know. I just think that at some point it's not going to be sustainable, and we're going to have to figure out how to get our stuff. I mean, for us, the closest town to do big city shopping is 100 miles away. So, I'm never going to get anything the same day unless I drive 100 miles in each direction. And these days with COVID, when I go down to the recycle thing to put my boxes and stuff in, it's just overflowing. So it's gotten even worse. Like they can't even keep up with it. And, I don't know what the answer is, but boy, it's just not getting any better.
Yep. Naga, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, I think corporate has to be a lot more sensitive to these aspects. Like in India, I was reading up, there was 2 million tons of electronic waste that was generated in India, right, last year. So I think that's humongous. But the good side is, what we do is, you have this exchange policy, so you don't junk these things, and manufacturers take it back and figure out a way to dispose of the waste. And also, like I know, like Swiggy is one of the, like DoorDash in India, which delivers a lot of food home, and they're looking at ways and means to reduce packaging or use packaging that is biodegradable. So a lot of effort is going on, but this is a huge problem. It can go on for a long time on this. But the good news I see is corporates becoming more sensitive, and the like this is what in India at least we keep telling the civilians also have to do their part. The civic sense has to come in. Government says don't use plastic bags, but people don't want to carry their own bags when they go for grocery shopping or whatever. It's just not the question of manufacturers and corporations. It's also civic sense has to set in quite a bit so that each citizen is aware and concerned about the environment.
Thank you. Next question. Oh, this is going to be good. Okay, so this is a very IETF specific, but I think you it is how do I say it? It's the rights of the user versus the rights of the network. IETF has 8890, which says that the standards should prioritize the interests of end users. This is part of some of this question. Inherent in this is that really IETF is making a lot of rules and making a lot of decisions, which I don't think people know about. And there's not necessarily an effective counter argument to be made. And so just what is your thought on this whole area, and especially with DNS over HTTPS? And I'm going to have Paul speak to this first, as I'm sure he's got a bunch of opinions.
I do, but in the interest of time, I'll try to focus. When I saw this latest RFC 8890, what I realized is there are a couple of real disconnects between the part of the world who believes that they are the stewards of the internet protocols and can pilot the global economy's way forward, and those of us who defend that economy. So, the easiest observation to make about the idea that the internet is for end users and that protocols and systems ought to reflect that is that I am an end user and I do not have a Wi-Fi chip in my brain. My nervous system is not an operating system. It does not run software. And so nothing that the IETF would come up with would apply to that. Rather, it applies to the things that I use to connect my consciousness to the global economy, my device, my operating system, my firewall, if I have one, my internet service provider, and whatever it is they might be doing to make me reachable or to make other things reachable to me or to make things unreachable if they're known to be dangerous. All of that happens outside of the human. So when you say that the internet is for end users, what you mean is the internet is for browser makers. The internet is for firmware makers, operating system makers. In other words, the internet is for the platforms to determine. And, I know that there are people who trust Apple or who trust Facebook or who trust Amazon, and so I don't want to upset anybody. I'm sure there are platforms you trust, but you shouldn't, because it's all software and all software has bugs and will always have bugs. So even if the policy of the platform is currently, in your favor, what it is, the implications, and you agree with those, you can't be bothered to make sure if it's about to change. And if they're not in the same legal jurisdiction as you, you may not have standing if they don't follow the policy that you agreed with. So, if you take the really trivial example of DNS centralization, and I know this comes across as let's use DNS over some encrypted channel, but what it really means is let's all use the same DNS platform. A small number of, quad 1, quad 9, quad 8, quad this, quad that. There are 200 more quad N's available, and I expect they will all be serving us DNS before long, because everybody wants our traffic, or everybody wants to make sure no one else gets our traffic. Whatever their motive is, it's not because they think the internet is for end users. It's because that's best for them. And we don't have the ability collectively at scale to manage the risks that come with that kind of centralization. So what we're doing is we're saying, look, if the platforms I'm depending on someday come under stress, whether it's a local regime wanting to install surveillance equipment or even installing the surveillance equipment without telling anybody, or maybe the company who provides that platform is having a bad year and they need a good quarter, and changing the policy that you originally agreed to is a way they can get a jump on revenue or restore profitability or something, then RFC 8890 is not going to stop them. And so I'm really sad that the security portion of the IETF is mostly academics or mostly freedom fighters, civil, the various people who might represent the Onion Route or Tor or the Electronic Freedom Foundation. They are certainly full of people who are very aware of our vulnerability to both systemic and device level problems. But what they don't know is, how do we defend that? How does a family use family filtering to protect little Johnny or little Susie from online predators who are a very real threat? How does a CISO use DNS filtering in order to make sure that they are in compliance with their legal regime as a corporate person? There's a whole lot of things that amount to the practical rubber meets road security that are considered outlandish if they are known at all by the team of people who has the ability to write a new RFC and publish it. So that disconnect is going to get us all killed slowly.
I'm just going to say one thing to that, Paul, which is that that what you're talking about is really the reason that Industry Network Technology Council was formed, is losing some very difficult security battles on behalf of industry. But anyway, I'm going to stop now, and we'll have that conversation later.
Can I have a follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
So I know that's true, and I read your charter when you invited me to begin participating, and I'm very, very excited to see this and to see that it's gathering steam. But what I want to the thought I'd like to leave people with is that the internet was a network of networks. That's what the word internet means, is a network of networks. That's why they chose that name. It wasn't a cool name that they then backfit a meaning to. What they had was a lot of networks that weren't talking to each other. So the idea of the internet was that those networks should be able to talk to each other. But it was networks talking to networks, like the network that is my virtualization environment in my laptop, the network in my house, whatever. There are networks, there are collections of things that are autonomously operated that are networks, and the internet makes it possible for those networks to talk to other networks. And that's not what the web is for. The web is for monetizing eyeballs. And so what we're seeing right now is kind of the web and its culture taking over from the original intent of the internet, which was to allow networks to talk to each other, right? As a firewall operator, I should be able to keep any IoT device that I don't trust, which is all of them, from doing things I don't like. But there's a key sentence in the first paragraph of RFC 8484, which is, and I quote, "This protocol is designed to prevent on-path interference in DNS operations," unquote. That is not an act of network of networks. That is us saying that the user should be able to connect to the surveillance capitalist on the far end without any awareness or any interference by any intermediate party, including your antivirus, your content filter, the kernel of your laptop's operating system. All of that is being disintermediated and just being told, hey, your job is to carry packets. We will tell you what packets to carry. That's a change in who owns what and how that ownership is expressed or observed. And I think that's gone unnoticed. I think we need a international conversation about whether the internet should remain a network of networks or if it is actually just a network of human eyeballs to be monetized. I'll shut up now.
Thank you, Paul, and that's a great introduction. You guys, we're not ending these conversations. Remember, at the very end, I'm going to ask you we're going to keep going, but let me let others talk. Henning, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so first of all, we should recognize that this particular RFC has no real force except by the people who then do something based on it. So I don't want to make it seem like, I don't think we should treat it like this is a legislative fiat that mandates a certain design, even if one could specifically spell out what that would mean in that. I do see it on a more, you're obviously taking a pretty negative view of it, but I would argue that it is a legitimate pushback to an inherent feature of most standards organizations. The IETF is really just one example of that. If you look at standards organizations for consumer products or building standards and so on, the making of those standards is largely dominated by vendors, industry, whatever you want to call it, people who sell the products that are being standardized. They're not really, they don't really have a means of integrating contributions from kind of a public at large, only to the extent, just like somebody who works for a building related manufacturer, they clearly also hopefully think of themselves as somebody who might get trapped in that building, and so they might have an interest in having better fire safety standards, and same for somebody who builds internet standards. Even if they work for a vendor or a service provider, they presumably also think of themselves as a consumer. But generally speaking, consumer advocates, for example, have a really difficult time for a variety of reasons, which we could discuss separately. It's about skills and primarily about resources, financial resources to do that, as in you have to pay people to do it. You can't rely on just volunteers to do that. And most consumer advocacy organizations don't have the money to hire an engineer at several $100,000 loaded cost a year to participate in standards making of any sort. So and obviously only one voice of many in that case, so that may or may not even matter given voting and in other standards organizations. So in any event, so I would not put too much emphasis on that. So I see that as essentially a pushback to what has become a much more corporate version, where the IETF used to have a fairly large set of independent-minded or academically minded contributors. I'd say generally that has been waning a bit. They still exist, but it's certainly compared to the early days, and that's natural as the technology matures and that. And secondly, in many of the cases, the trade-offs you said, and this is certainly true for DOE type of things, depends largely on the implementation. So if you think of having a web browser that consults a local configuration database to contact a corporate DOE server, then not much really has changed in terms of the ability of a corporation to do whatever DNS filtering they want to do. Same for child protection type things. If a browser can be set up to do whatever, point at kind of a desired DNS resolver, the protocol used to get to it is relatively immaterial. Even today, I can set up a VPN if I'm sufficiently sophisticated and then access any of these random non-filtering DNS servers in that. It requires a little bit more effort, but it's certainly not impossible to do that unless you prohibit all VPN usage or tunnels of any sort today. So I would push back a bit that the sky is falling here model. This is a tension we've had for a while, and I think it's a reflection of a concern that user interests have not been well represented institutionally within the IETF and other standards bodies. Again, this is hardly an IETF problem only, just by the nature of things.
Okay, thank you so much, Henning. Cathy, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to approach this a little bit differently. When I was reading through RFC 8890, it's my common peeve with the IETF. So we had a working group called HomeNet, which was basically to design an automated, like you could just get a router at the store and plug it in your home and everything would just magically work. And we had a group of IETF engineers who were not designing a HomeNet for an ordinary person in their home, but for them. So they had some idea that the network in the home would have, 5 subnets and a firewall and a separate network for people who come to visit, and that they would have all these other things. Whereas, somebody actually in their home is going to have, a PC and, maybe a cable modem and a couple IoT devices, which, they're going to be more and more of those. But, like, I don't know any ordinary non-IETF person that has, 5 subnets in their house and is concerned about, one day we had a discussion about if you took your cable modem to your neighbor's house, what address would it get? Anyway, I don't want to belabor this, but I just think that, it's a great idea to focus on end users, but literally there are no normal end users involved in the IETF. And the people who are, I'm not sure if they really have a good feel for like what normal people do on the internet. Anyway, it's just a peeve of mine, but HomeNet failed because they were designing this automated, thing that would automatically configure for them, not for like, my brother in Phoenix. And it just was never going to happen.
Interesting. Yeah. Next question. Okay. Deepak, what do you see? This is in your ballpark. What about the cultural and social implications of adding another, God knows how many people, especially in India, onto the internet?
So when we are looking at getting so many people by the hordes, so for example, hundreds of millions of people coming onto the internet very, very fast. I think one major challenge is that many people who are coming now, so traditionally, a lot of people who were using the internet, they were relatively rich, mostly in urban areas. Most of them knew English, and most of them were using desktops. However, the reality is that today, when we are looking at most of the people who are coming on the net, many of them are I'm not even talking about English literacy. I'm saying that they do not have functional literacy. Okay, and at the same time, the level of affordability is low. But beyond all these things, the other important thing is that they need and they do depend a lot on audiovisual than on the text, because text is something which is they can't read, they can't write, but at the same time they can speak, they can watch, they can send that type of communication, and they can consume that type of information. And that's why I said that the design of the devices and the design of the network itself has to be better in terms of audiovisual content rather than the text itself. Traditionally, it has been text and then, yes, okay, graphics and video and other stuff. But for a lot of people now, this is the only way that they are going to do. Second thing is, for them, that small screen itself is what they are doing everything with. So whether it's about education, healthcare, financial transactions also, financial transactions may not require so much of a challenge otherwise, but they may pose a very different type of challenge, for example, in terms of the type of figures that you have, in terms of the OTP. So OTP also you are getting on the same device as the device on which you are using these. So I think these are the areas that we may have to use more of things like biometric and other stuff. So I think in terms of cultural social norms, what we do need to look at is the way things are evolving. So look at the type of user profile we are getting. And in terms of different languages, so machine to machine translation. So there I would say in terms of NLP using AI, that's coming out very, very handy in that sense. So these are some of the things that we should definitely look at.
Thank you so much, Deepak. Next question, and this is our last question. And so if people, I think we probably have maybe time for maybe one question from the audience, and then it'll be time to stop. So Henning, what are your thoughts about all these devices that are connecting, and then of course the business that's being done? You know, what are we keeping up, and especially in terms of security? You know, what are your thoughts in this whole area?
Yeah, so I think we had two discussions going on. So one is what I might call the scale discussions, and one of the kind of the risk, more low probability risk type of discussions. It seems like on the first one, namely the kind of things that happen on a day-to-day basis, we seem to be fighting the same issues again and again. This is not about kind of surprising technology feats or surprising vulnerabilities in some protocol that some clever academic discovered. This is largely about the same lack of housekeeping, the lack of good engineering that's been going on for decades. And we seem to be struggling to make progress there. We had the same problem when electricity was first invented. Lots of people designed devices that, besides whatever they were designed to do, also electrocuted people and also set houses ablaze. And so the insurance industry designed a model, namely what they call the underwriters, which is insurance laboratory, that said, if you want to have a fire door, which was their first product that they certified in a building to get fire insurance, well, you actually have to have it certified. And so increasingly for the consumer devices, the notion that we can just have electrical safety and RF emission safety and not have even the basics of cybersecurity hygiene, so to say, implemented, just seems unsustainable. It leads to market failure. Consumers have no way of distinguishing good devices from bad devices. It leads to all the wrong kind of bottom feeding that we talked about in a different context earlier today in that. So I do believe that there are non-technical requirements that should be, that are implementable, that don't prescribe particular technologies, but are flexible enough to evolve. So for example, it should be clear how long a manufacturer supports a device, for how many years. Security upgrades. They should have mechanisms to report security vulnerabilities in that are reasonably well documented, so that there is a notion of a reasonable response time to such a vulnerability. They should be basic testing, so that things that we all know shouldn't be done aren't done. It should be manifests of the components so that it's easier to detect when some device has some rot or some bit rot open source software. So I think there are things that don't mandate technology, but just mandate best practices, or that we've known about for decades. That will help. And again, this is not the first time we've dealt with this problem. We just seem to be unwilling to learn the lessons of that first time.
Thank you, Henning. Deepak, do you have any thoughts?
So very quickly, the state of the IoT security, by and large, is, just in 4 words, I would say: hackable, yes; patchable, no.
Oh, no, yeah, very profound. Okay, so thank you all so much. Let's go to the next slide. There's one question that, from the audience, and I'm going to rephrase it in a sense, and then we'll close up a bit. And what I'll do is I'll have each of you give a couple of sentences on that, and then we'll wrap it up. So basically the question is, it's actually the human being who's the weakest link in all this. And so what can we do about people? The user. So Cathy, I'm going to start with you on that.
What can we do about the user?
Yeah, well, no, it's tough. Yeah.
I think education. People have to, learn that it's a big bad world out there, and that just because it's on the internet, it isn't necessarily true. I think that because people, it's a mystery to them how it all works to begin with, they give it more credence than they probably should.
Yeah. Naga, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Well, we live in a democratic world, and people have to make choices by themselves. And like we said, that there can be education, but there's you do what you want to do because that's the right you have. As long as you should make sure that you don't bother others, trouble others, but you can't stop somebody from doing something for themselves, and they have to be cognizant of what they do.
Sure. Okay, Paul, what about you?
Well, I have championed the idea that we should educate users or educate email senders or educate IoT device makers, and that somehow they are open to this and that such an effort can scale. I regret my naivete. We can't do any of those things. It isn't going to happen. So I think Lawrence Lessig, in a paper he wrote year 2000, Y2K, famously said that code was law. And that is very true. So I think that we're not going to get anywhere solving the user problem. We're going to have to solve the problem using apparatus that the user will find attractive and that we will find attractive if they deploy it. That's really the only practical way forward. That's not to say we shouldn't be doing more. I know that Palo Alto Networks has partnered with the Girl Scouts of America here in the US in order to set up a system of merit badges having to do with cybersecurity. And I think that is a fantastic idea because kids get this stuff. They have intuitions about this, the same way I knew how to set the clock on the VCR and my parents did not when I was a kid. Well, there are kids that understand, which browser you should and should not use. The parents don't. And so I think there is a lot we can do to try to push better knowledge into the user community, but it won't solve the problem. It will barely move the needle. We're going to have to change what devices and applications they have access to. And we're going to have to make some that are attractive to them that will also be attractive systemically to us. And let me just say thank you again for inviting me to this panel.
Thank you all very much. Deepak, what about you? And then I'll let Henning get the last word in.
Okay, so when we are looking at these type of, so I think what we need to look at is how do we make the human as the strongest link rather than the weakest link. So whether it's through capacity building, whether it's through other collaborative models or anything like that. But ultimately, I don't think we can continue with the status quo of human as the weakest link. Why can't human be the strongest link?
So interesting. Henning, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm going to take a different tack. There's nothing I admire efforts for education. After all, I'm in the education business, if you want to call it that. And I do believe that that is tremendously helpful. But I think, like, if I understood Paul correctly, scaling is hard. And we didn't solve the cigarette problem or the pollution problem, let alone that we have actually solved them, just by simply making people stop smoking individually, or by just encouraging people to recycle or something. We use the institutions that we have to support individuals in their decisions and their actions. So that may mean providing, for example, high quality content. So public media can help with that. In many countries, they provide vetted and high quality information, but often it is receiving very little public support, in particular in the United States. And simply, this is not just some random small-scale criminals exploiting dark alleys. These are mega corporations that are intentionally or by convenience exploiting human vulnerabilities in that. And so we are not going to fix those problems without fixing the distributors of misinformation, the designers of bad products, the distributors of bad products. For example, just relying on individual human education is, in my view, putting the burden on those least able to bear it. And again, so thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Oh, thank you guys so much. And I want to tell you guys that you know, to stay involved, and Cathy and I are going to be coming out with something. I don't know how to do this. I don't know where we're going next, you know, but we're putting some thoughts into how to go forward on this. Please stay involved, and then please come to the next session on on IPv6. That's going to be this evening. You know, sorry about the timing on all this. It was just, believe me, it is crazy trying to do a U.S.-India joint you know, session. And thank you all for participating. And we'll see you very soon. Yep.
Thanks,
Nalini. Thank you.
For inviting.
Thank you. I put the social link as well in the chat, as well as you can find that in the program. So if the folks who want to have some free time, come on the Zoom social link and maybe introduce each other and network. See you there, and later in 9 hours for the IPv6 track. Thank you.
Thanks, Dhruv. Bye.